I took a poll of the students in my Mastering the Art of the Portrait course to find out what they were struggling with the most, what their pain points were, and how much money they've spent trying to overcome this particular problem. And here's the results. The top was getting a likeness, 34 people here. The next was constructing form and proportions, seeing values, drawing features were a close second. Well, they weren't close, but these were stacked up close. But by far, getting a likeness was the most problem area that people struggle with. So let's talk about that today and try to figure out how to make this better. So with respect to portraiture, you can bet that one of the more challenging things is to achieve a likeness. John Singer Sargent said, "A portrait is a picture in which there is just a tiny little something not quite right about the mouth." He also said, "Every time I paint a portrait, I lose a close friend." So there's some sense of humor there and maybe some truth. But, you know, when drawing a face, you don't always have to achieve a likeness, right? It depends on your goal for the drawing. It may be that you just want a beautiful drawing that reflects your creative vision. And so just moving everything around and doing the precise work that it takes to get that likeness would somehow compromise your artistic vision, right? And your overall goal. So if you're just trying to create something, be creative, then it's not important to get a likeness as much as it is to express yourself. So, but on the other hand, you may want to go further than just getting your portraits to look human. You may want to go through the demanding task of getting it to look like someone specific. That's a lot harder. It might be because you want to challenge yourself and see if your skills are up to it. It might be that you have a commission or a client. And so how do we do it? How can we take on that kind of task and succeed? Well, to get a likeness, you have to have structural and proportional knowledge of the head. If you know those two things, then you're not married to copying. The temptation, though, is for most people is to jump in and try to draw the specific features right out of the gate, and they miss the forest through the trees. However, the first thing you must do is lay a good foundation. Mapping out the proportions and placement of the forms and features is essential for this task. Let's talk a little bit about proportion and position. If I was to come in here and I have the correct size of all the features, but the position is wrong, right? You can see that things quickly go out of whack. So I can have the exact correct proportion and size to the elements, but I lose the likeness. Okay, on the other hand, I may have, let's go into liquify here. I may have the sizes and the features incorrect. And if that's the case, then it's hard to get the position correct. So if the size of my eyes, you know, are too big, they're too wide, the nose is a little bit too short, right? The upper lip. And this is pretty funny stuff, right? So I think, you know, we can just really get a little crazy with this stuff. So if the sizes of the features are incorrect, it's hard to get the correct position for them, right? Because the space between the tear ducts, if the eyes are too big, it's too small typically on a normal human being. So we don't know where to put the eyes. Should we put it farther out? Should we, you know, put them upper, raise them up, lower them a little bit? So that's a problem. So how do you get both size and position correct? So I want to suggest that you learn from a standard first. So the standard is like this. Let's just It's the plain head. It's the simple construction. It's a generic head. Basically, you could refer to it as a generic head or a standard. And it's important to get the concept of the head internalized so you can make predictions. You know, before they figured out, modern science figured out physics, and they wanted to see what floated in water and what didn't. Every time they'd have to go out and do an experiment and throw a rock in the water and say, well, did it sink or did it float? And throw a leaf. Did it float? Did it sink? Right? And every time it was different. Each day they went out because they couldn't make any predictions. But if you can get the concept that things that are heavier than water, have more mass than water, sink, and things that don't float, then you can make all kinds of predictions. Well, the same thing's with drawing the head. If you can get the concept of the plain head, the simple box-like structure of the head, then it won't be the case that every time you go to do a drawing, you're like, oh, how do you do eyes again? And is that nose a little bit too high? Is it too low? All these questions, you know, where's the ears, the hairline? Those things kind of fade into the background, and you're going to be able to quickly draw a generic head from memory and then tailor make it to look like the person that you're trying to get the likeness of, right? So you have the basic planes of the head on the left, right? And then you can move to something a little more realized on the right side. Okay, so they're still generic. And so what you want to do is kind of get a drawing that starts to look, you know, a little more like this. On the left is the generic block in. On the right is pretty paint. Okay, I'm going to use pretty paint. It could be pencil rendering, doesn't matter. But the idea is that you have this block in and it looks like that all the time. And then you move it over to this, okay? That saves time. So on the left is modeling, right? And on the right is really rendering and detailing, because you're thinking about the specific texture and material and details. But those come after this structure is nailed down and firm, okay? So that's what I want to encourage you guys to start studying and looking for, is this generic head idea. So if we're looking at a generic head, the biggest temptation for new drawers, maybe all drawers for a time period, is to jump in and draw the specific features right away. Let me make an analogy. That's like if you play guitar, you just jump in and try to play the fastest solo you can from Led Zeppelin or Van Halen. You have to start with a metronome very slowly so you can get control over the pick and the angle that it strikes the strings and build up speed over time. It's the same thing if you're singing. You've got to start slowly doing basic fundamental things. Otherwise, you can't sing high or you can't sustain a note. You can't control your vibrato. So this kind of generic head saves us from jumping in and making big mistakes right at the beginning. And how does it do that? Let's talk about the center line. Basically, the center line is a concept, and the center line runs down the center of the head. The head is bilateral in nature. It's the same on both sides. The right is a mirror image of the left and vice versa. So that center line tells where the left leaves off from the right. But it tells us a lot more than that. Let's just do the center line again. We got the center of the chin, and coming through with this without the nose. And then it hits the eyebrows, and then it changes direction a little bit up until the hairline, and then it changes direction even more and becomes the top of the head. So that's the center line. And like I said, it does a lot for us because it tells us about the tilt of the head. So if the head is tilting this way or it's tilting that way, right, that center line is going to help us, right, with the tilt, because we're measuring against a standard that's a plumb line that's vertical, that's like 0 degrees, right? And if we can measure that against an angle, right, of whatever degrees that is, if we can measure that, we can establish the basic tilt or gesture of the head. It also helps us establish the gaze, like up or down, right? So if someone's looking up or someone's totally looking down, right, that's also important that we get this angle compared to if they're straight up and down, right? And that plumb line, we measure the distance or the angle in between there. We have to get this plumb line or the standard first in our mind. What is true vertical? And then we can measure everything else against that. So the center line gives us a ton of information, and that's just a start. We haven't even drawn anything yet. We're just getting, the basic orientation of the head on the page. And once we know this, it's pretty easy to do. Now, the other thing is that if the head is not only tilting up and down or side to side, but it's rotating left and right, this way. So if it's as if someone's shaking their head. So that center line is going to be, off the center, right? Compared to if someone was looking straight ahead. Now we have this kind of convex line that all the features and everything is now reoriented to. Okay, simple stuff, but necessary. So not only do we have a vertical plumb line that we can measure things against, but we have a horizontal that we can measure things against. Okay, and that's something to get in your mind too. It's almost like part of a grid, right? We have the horizontal and the vertical, and we measure angles off those things. So if we line up the eyes, line up the nose, right? Everything's going to be in relation to each other in perspective. So if I have my eyes lined up, but my nose is kind of off and my mouth tilt is off, then they're not lined up. These should be horizontal. They should be parallel, right? In perspective or implied perspective. So these lines are all parallel, even the chin, the eyebrows, and then where the ears are. All these things should be parallel lines. Okay, because when you turn the head, right, things start to deviate from the norm. And you can see that this is horizontal, and against that, now my eye line is this way. And the nose should then be, these should be parallel, these features. Mouth, nose, eyebrow, ears, bottom of chin, right? Now they're all parallel, but they're going to a vanishing point somewhere out here in space, okay? And so that's the implied perspective. You don't have to really respect the vanishing point so strictly out here and do linear perspective. but it's just implied if you know a little bit about it, or at least you can line up everything so that they are parallel. You're going to solve a lot of problems right there. So parallel lines in any orientation, looking straight, head tilt, head rotating. So keep that in mind. That's very important. And it's something that people overlook constantly. If most of the time, or many times, if something's wrong with a drawing from a 3/4 view, it's because the eyes are, floating upward and the nose is going off to a different place at a different angle, and the eyes, and the mouth, same thing. And so we just get this kind of counterbalance kind of thing, and it makes our face, it makes getting a likeness harder. So another thing we have to look for is sighting angles to help us position the elements. So if I have the angle from tear duct to the alar facial groove, okay, that's where the wing of the nose meets the cheek, the alar facial groove. That angle right there, okay, that's important. I'm comparing it. In a sense, I could just compare it to a true vertical and then find the distance, right? And say, okay, how far to the left is the tear duct from the alar facial groove? Because I'm really looking for these points that'll show me position, right? So I'm asking myself, what's this distance? What's this angle? Just very simple questions to ask yourself. How wide is it? How tall is it? What's the angle between this feature and that feature? So these questions, very simple questions about dimension and position. So I can again cite an angle, to find the relationship between the nose and the mouth. Is the mouth as wide as the nose is, right? Is it wider? Just where is it? And I can cite an angle from the alar facial groove to the terminus of the lips. Again, I can drop a horizontal from the top of the chin, bottom of the bottom lip, horizontally out this way like a construction line. And I can find that angle where the front half of the jaw becomes the back half of the jaw and makes its way up to the ear. So that point right there, I found with a horizontal to line that up. Okay, how about the width of the chin? How do we find that, right? Because that's crucial in finding a likeness. Everything needs to be dialed in. So the way you find that is to usually find the pupil and draw a vertical down, vertical plumb line, right? And that'll give you, on average, the width of the chin. Okay? If you don't find that, then your chin could be crooked, right? Could end up over here. This vertical plumb line usually, okay, on this model, it's just the eyes are a little far apart, but it gives you the width of the mouth, right? On average. So the mouth is not going to intrude or cross those boundaries and become too wide, right? And usually the mouth is wider than the width of the nose, right? So the mouth is never just that. In a cartoon it could be, but in real life it won't be. if we take a third from the hairline to the brow, and then the brow to the nose, you know, bottom of the nose, and bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin, right? That's on average, if we break this into thirds, we can space and place the features pretty quickly, right? And then we can really look at the model and say, well, you know, on this person, if this is our standard from the hairline to the brow, their nose might be a little bit shorter than that, right? Or this distance might be a little bit longer. And then you can just use your eyes to measure these things. And I would just suggest, instead of using a grid or using some calipers or measuring precisely, first do it with your hand-eye coordination. Measure it with your eyes and then draw it, and then go back and use a measuring device and just see if you were in the ballpark or not, because the only way you're going to develop this skill is just to do it. It's the best measuring tool you have is your eyes, and that sense of making those marks and those distances with your hands. So it's the hand-eye coordination. So practice it without really measuring precisely, but using your eyes to do it. Look at the model and then look at your drawing, and then go ahead and take a stab at it, you know, and then come back and measure it and see if you got it right. If you got it right, great. If you got it wrong, see where it's wrong and keep practicing it, okay? Because it's an acquired skill, and the more you practice it, the better and better it's going to get. It's like anything else. So again, we can split the head up into thirds. We could split it into halves, and that halfway point is the eye line on average, okay? So that means the eyes aren't going to be up here, right? And they're not going to be down here by the nose. Just somewhere in the center is good enough when you're blocking in. So you don't have to worry. What you need to do is get control of your box. The box is a pretty easy concept to get down, relatively speaking, than, let's say, a head would be. Because if you're thinking, you know, zygomatic arch, nasalis, frontalis, superciliary arch, and all these muscle bone connections, it's going to be confusing and it's going to be really laborious. So it's just too hard to work like that. So just get the concept of your box and your basic value, and then you can affix the proportions to that. You can affix the features and where they go to the box, you know. So if you have this box in space, right, then you can kind of come along and say, all right, where's the center? And the eyes are in the center. You know, the brow is a little bit above that. You can get the nose in there, put the features in there, mouth, chin. And so it's kind of, it's a lot quicker, you know. And then you can kind of cut off parts of the box, right? So I think you get the picture with that, right? So it's the concept that's important, and don't think about anatomy. Think about this, the box, the center line, and the basic orientation of the head on the page first. In between, from tear duct to tear duct, there will be one eye's distance on average, okay? And then you can adjust to fit the particulars of the person that you're drawing. So we have the width of the eye is around the same as the width of the nose, right? Around the same as the width of the eyebrow. So you can use that, right? From the eyebrow to the top of the lower portion of the eye socket, Usually you can just take that distance and move it down and you'll get to the bottom of the nose, right? So there's all these proportions that you can find and start relating one thing to another. Okay, one last thing. So in terms of proportion, the head is 3:2. It's 3 units tall, and you take 2 of those units and you just bring them over here and measure the width and get your width. So you can derive your width from your height or vice versa. But that means that the head is basically an oval, and it's wider on top than it is on the bottom. Okay, a little bit wider on top than it is on the bottom, and the cheeks are the widest part of the head. It's wider than the brow. So if it's 3:2, that means your head is not going to be a circle. That's going to look like a bubble head, and that won't be right. And it's not a compressed ovoid shape, right? It's a little bit compressed, but it's not compressed like this one is. So don't do that, and don't do this, right? Okay guys, that's it for the first video on getting a likeness, but stay tuned. I've got 2 more awesome videos in the series on getting a likeness, and we're going to critique drawings of students in the course. So stay tuned. I'll see you then. Remember to like and subscribe and share. Talk to you later.